In this video, I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know about drafting blue-white in Duskmourn. I've done over 40 drafts on the way to Mythic this season, and I want to share my knowledge with you. I'll be going over general game plan, pick order, trophy deck examples, and also any extra tips that I might have for you at the end. The game plan for blue-white is just cast as many enchantments and unlock as many rooms as possible for value. The two signposts on commons here show this very well. You're either trying to cast enchantment spells cheaper or unlock things for cheaper or get gremlins for some reason. Doing this allows you to get ahead on board, and therefore often blue decks can kind of play a little bit aggressive and push their advantage early and win that way, but there are also builds of the deck that are a bit more slow and mid-rangey. Before I dive into the card evaluations, I just want to break down how I think about things a little bit. I feel like step one of drafting is putting good cards in your deck. If you're bringing a knife to a gunfight, well, good luck. With that in mind, I will be quoting stats, but also giving my opinions. The stats are coming from 17lands.com, and I will be mostly quoting game in hand win rate, which is effectively how often you win after you draw a card in a game. I will also be talking about the concept of wheeling or tabling. This is when you see a card initially, maybe say pack one, pick one, and then it wheels around the table past the other 7 players and back to you again, so that on your 9th pick, or possibly later, you see the card again. In the example that I have here, I pick a red rare, and there's 2 other red cards in the pack, and then one of them tables back round to me. Potentially that could be a signal that red is open, but at least it's something to keep in mind. So an edge that you can get when drafting is knowing what other decks don't want, but your deck might, and then try and wheel those cards so that you get even more playables for your deck. So starting with the best commons, we have Trapped in the Screen, a 3-cost enchantment that exiles target artifact, creature, or enchantment the opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield, and it has Ward 2. This is made for this deck. It's an enchantment, and it's one of the best removal spells at common. Being able to exile things is very important in this format. There's a lot of annoying death triggers, and if you're playing slightly aggressive, then the opponent can have trouble finding time to pay the Ward 2 to remove this. So you're very happy to have a lot of these in your deck. In fact, one of the trophy decks I had 4 of these somehow. Next we have Glimmer Burst, which is a 4-cost instant that draws 2 cards and then makes a 1/1 Glimmer token. You'll note that the Glimmer token is an enchantment creature, which will trigger Eerie. So this card is already good without any Eerie value, but with that as well, it's disgusting. If you happen to trigger any of the good Eerie cards, then you're so far ahead. This being able to dig through your deck whilst also having a creature in play to keep you alive is very powerful. For how strong this is, I would say this card actually goes quite late. Sometimes you might even be able to wheel this card. Next up is Glimmerlight. It's an artifact for 2 mana that makes a 1/1 Glimmer token, but also you can equip it to a creature to give it +1/+1. Glimmerlight is just one of the best commons in the set, but because of the Eerie synergy, it becomes extra good in this deck. You're slightly aggro leaning, so being able to push through damage with your small creatures is great. Meatlocker Drowned Diner. For 3 with Meatlocker, you can tap target creature and put 2 stun counters on it, and for 5, you can draw 3 and then discard 1. Again, very good card, but extra good in this case because it's enchantment. Being able to remove an annoying blocker for a few turns is long enough when you're attacking each of those turns, and in the late game if you need to be digging for something or you've drawn too many lands, being able to hold them and then pitch them to Drowned Diner is really good upside. Unable to Scream is a 1-cost aura. Enchant target creature, loses all abilities, becomes a toy artifact creature with base power 0/2 in addition to other types, and as long as the enchanted creature is face down, it can't be turned face up. This card turned out to be one of the best blue commons on average and is still probably quite underdrafted. It looks like it's be quite easy to deal with. Maybe your opponent could return their creature to their hand or destroy the enchantment, but it turns out that in a lot of the cases this just stays and deals with a really annoying creature for you for very, very little mana. Seize from Slumber is an instant that destroys target creature. Normally it costs 5, but if they're tapped it actually costs 2. So this spell is not so great if you are forcing attacks into the opponent constantly, because then they're on the defensive and you have to pay 5. But if you're kind of taking things more slowly, or you're playing the control role against a more aggressive opponent, then this is amazing value. Grand Entryway Elegant Rotunda. Grand Entryway for 2, you get to make an enchantment Glimmer token, and Elegant Rotunda for 3, you get to put +1/+1 counter on up to each of 2 target creatures. This just goes off in this deck. Again, if you have any of the Eerie things, like some of the creatures we'll mention later, it feels completely unfair how much value you get off this for so little mana. Being able to make a creature and then put counters on or get another creature or buff up your creatures to be as big as 3/3 or 4/4 and then start attacking with them, you can easily snowball out of control with this card. Unsettling Twins is a 2/2 for 4 that also creates another 2/2 by manifesting Dread. There are manifest synergies in its colors, but not particularly Delirium, so manifest is fine but not crazy. Maybe if you hit a flyer, for example, you can flip it up later, but it's just good value getting getting two 2/2 bodies for 4 in this format, and Unsettling Twins often goes quite late, so keep that in mind. Fear of Surveillance is a 2/2 enchantment creature for 2 with Vigilance, and whenever it attacks you, surveil 1. Although 2/2s for 2 will often get traded out, the ability to trigger Eerie here, but also dig through your deck is great, and if you are able to grow this, maybe with Glimmerlight to a 3/3 for example, being able to attack and block with Vigilance can really start to take over the board. Tunnel Surveyor is a 2/2 for 3 that when it comes in makes a Glimmer token. Again, multiple bodies are great, triggering Eerie is great. It's not quite as strong of a rate as the other cards before it, but you're still very happy to be running this. It also goes quite late because although it's okay in other decks, it's only really good in this deck. The last of the top commons is Vanish from Sight. For 4 you get to return target non-land permanent to its owner's either top or bottom of their deck, and then you surveil 1. Very rarely would you use this on your own thing to save it, but sometimes that can be relevant. Save your own big creature, put it on top of your deck, draw it next turn. Generally speaking, you're using it to absolutely ruin combat when they try and attack into you, you block, they play a trick or do something, and then you can just send it to the top of their library and win the interaction. Setting them back a full turn can be massive. If they tap out for a large creature, you put it back, and then they're like, I want to keep this, so they put it on top, and then it spends a whole other turn for them to draw it and then recast it. It's very flexible and strong. So these next few cards are what I would call filler commons. You are happy to have them in your deck. You'll need some amount of them to fill out your curve, but you're not really picking them highly. They often go a little bit late, and you usually don't want too many of them in your deck. And these last cards are cards you actively want to avoid putting in your deck. Either they are just always bad in every deck, or they're just not really suited for this deck. On to the top uncommons, we have Sheltered by Ghosts. For 2 mana for an aura, you get to exile any target non-land permanent until this leaves play, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+0, lifelink, and ward 2. This has absolutely everything you want. It deals with any annoying permanent. It gets to make your creatures harder to kill and also makes them better in combat. Again, if you're being a little bit aggressive, then ward 2 becomes huge, becomes very fiddly to manage with. You can put it on something hard to kill at home, or you can put it on something and attack in with it. Optimistic Scavenger is a 1/1 for 1 that whenever you play an enchantment, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Doesn't have to be your own, but it usually will be. If you start with this and then you do like Grand Entryway, Elegant Rotunda, you pretty much win the game on the spot. The amount of advantage you get from this just snowballs so fast, and if you ever get multiples of this, then good luck to your opponent. It has an insanely high opening hand win rate, and you are always happy to see this card. Fear of Isolation is a 2/3 enchantment creature for 2 with flying, and as an additional cost to cast it, you have to return a permanent you control to your hand. So not non-land permanent like normal, you can return lands with this, but usually what you're trying to do is get additional value off re-triggering enters triggers, such as your rooms or anything else that might work for you. It being an enchantment creature itself obviously triggers Eerie, and being a cheap, efficiently costed flyer is great as well in a kind of aggressive leaning deck. It does a lot of subtle things, and the more you play with it, the more you'll realize how much you can do with it. Gremlin Tamer. For white and blue, you get a 2/2 with Eerie, make a 1/1 gremlin creature token. I don't know why blue-white is making red gremlins, but here we are. This card is an army in a can. Never risk this creature dying in combat. Don't attack with it into something that might kill it with like a destroy target tap creature or a flash creature or something. Just leave it at home, making infinite gremlins, and you will win so much. For the opponent, it's an absolute must kill straight away. As soon as they've gotten 1 or 2 creatures, then it's already so much value. Next we have Unnerving Grasp. For 3, it's a sorcery that returns target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then you manifest Dread. This really swings the momentum in a game. If you've both got 2/2s and then you Unnerving Grasp, now you're attacking for 2 and you have 2 2/2s, and they are suddenly in an awkward spot, and you can start leveraging your other return target permanent cards or your counter spells and stuff and just slowly chip away at them and keep control over the board. It also for no reason hits non-land permanents rather than just creatures, so this can allow you to deal with a lot of other annoying permanents in the meantime. Next we have Ethereal Armor. For 1 cost, you enchant a creature and it gets +1/+1 and first strike equal to the number of enchantments that you control, including this one. So being able to turn all your small creatures into legitimate threats is great, but you also have a few flyers hanging around in this deck and ways to give creatures lifelink and such, so Ethereal Armor can very quickly just threaten to end the game. But even if they do answer it, in this deck you're probably getting Eerie triggers off casting it, so although it's usually card disadvantage to play an aura and have the creature die, you're probably getting more off it than most. Also especially good against decks that deal direct damage rather than exile effects, because often you can get the creature to be way too big to die to 3 or 5 damage damage, say from red. Next we have Surgical Suite Hospital Room. For 2 you get to return target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and Hospital Room for 4 you attack and can put a +1/+1 counter on the attacking creature. Again, it's a room, so this is great, and it allows you to slowly build your creatures as you attack, or you can get back some of your powerful eerie creatures like Gremlin Tamer or Optimistic Scavenger if they get killed. Stay Hidden, Stay Silent is a 2-cost aura that taps the enchanted creature, they can't untap, and then for 6 you can shuffle this and the creature into their owner's libraries as a sorcery and manifest. There aren't too many people playing green-white survivor cards around at the moment, and such this becomes very strong removal, which eventually pays off into an extra creature. This is a high pick for any blue deck, but again, you just get extra value from it being an enchantment. Bottomless Pool Locker Room. For 1, you can return a creature to its owner's hand, and for 5, this stays in the battlefield, saying whenever 1 or more of your creatures hits the opponent, you draw a card. So I kind of describe this tempo-y bouncing game plan with Unnerving Grasp. This is another part of that puzzle. Again, you're making smaller creatures, they play something big, you return it to their hand, you attack in, you chip for 1 or 2 damage, and then you draw a card. They replay their big thing, and then maybe you tap down their big thing, and then you attack for 3 or 4 and you draw another card. This is exactly the kind of thing that a slightly aggressive blue deck wants to be doing. Splitskin Doll is a 2/1 artifact creature for 2. When it enters, you draw a card and then you discard unless you control another creature with power 2 or less. In this deck, you're going to have a lot of small creatures, like plenty of Glimmer tokens going around, so usually this will be draw a card. You don't really care about Delirium, but it's just an efficient way of continuing to dig through your deck and minimize bad luck. Flood Pit Drowner is a 2/1 for 2 with Flash and Vigilance. When it enters, you tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it, and then for 2 you can tap and shuffle this and target creature with a stun counter on it into each of your libraries. It's a bit of a weird design on this card, but generally speaking, you will flash this in at the end of turn or maybe before combat, tap their most annoying creature. On your turn, you attack if you can, because it has Vigilance. Ideally you get in for 2, and then you probably pay to tap this and then shuffle both this and their very annoying creature back into their deck. There are also weird situations with, say, Meat Locker, where that has put a stun counter on it as well, and you could do some shenanigans. Shard Mage's Rescue for 1 is a flash enchantment that when you put it on a creature you control, they get hexproof until the end of turn, and then for all times it gets +1/+1. This is a very flexible card. Again, you've got your eerie triggers, but being able to completely fizzle removal from working or win a combat by just a little bit of extra damage and toughness is very flexible and one of the better 1-cost tricks. Next we have Inquisitive Glimmer. Blue and white, you get a 2/3 enchantment creature which lowers the cost of enchantment spells by 1 and unlock cost by 1 as well. As you can see, so many of the cards before this are enchantments, and being able to reduce the cost of already good cards by a whole 1 mana completely snowballs out of control very fast. And yet, despite how strong this is, it doesn't win as much as the other cards before it. You're still very happy to take a lot of this card. Next we have Glimmer Seeker, a 3/3 for 3 that when it is tapped in your second main phase, you get to make a Glimmer creature, but if you have a Glimmer, then you draw a card. This suits the slightly more aggressive leaning versions of blue-white more, but again, you're making glimmers, you're drawing cards, it's great. It's a little bit iffy in slower ones where you're not able to push pressure so well because it might have trouble attacking, but it's still a very strong effect. And finally, for the top uncommons, we have Fear of Abduction. It is a 6-cost 5/5 flyer enchantment creature with an additional cost that you have to exile a creature that you control. When it enters, you exile target creature an opponent controls, and then when Fear of Abduction leaves the battlefield, each of you put those cards back into your hand. So Fear of Abduction is a little bit unusual. You can do things like exile a Glimmer and just accept that you've lost a small creature and you'll never get it back. Or you can try and get something with maybe an enters trigger that you might like to rebuy again in the future in case they manage to deal with Fear of Abduction. But it is just a 5/5 flyer for 6, which will end a lot of games. These next cards are more the filler uncommons. A lot of these are still legitimately very good. This deck does win a lot, and as such, a lot of these cards have quite a good win rate. They're just not as important as the other ones, and they're quite replaceable. I will shout out Scrabbling Skullcrab. It's gone up and down in the evaluation a lot as the set has been out. Initially, it was seen as a complete joke. Then people started to find ways to use it. At the moment, I would say it's actually relatively strong to have 1 of these or 2 of these in your deck if you're happy going long. Any 3-color or controlling decks are actually terrified of Skullcrab because if they mill, say, 4 to 6 cards, they probably lose that game when they wouldn't have otherwise lost it. So keep it in mind as an option, especially if you end up in a slightly slower version of blue-white. And finally, these cards you should really avoid playing in blue-white. So I personally had a couple of trophies with this deck. You'll see here a very skillful 4 trapped in the screen, 3 Fear of Isolation deck. As you can expect, my opponents couldn't really stop me from attacking them with Mind Skinner very easily. And more recently, this is at the Diamond rank, which is a little bit more reasonable looking and a little bit of a slower build overall. There were plenty of games where I rode Gremlin Tamer all the way to victory, making like 6 or 7 different gremlins and then tapping or bouncing their creatures repeatedly to win. So final tips. Blue-white is maybe the most drafted archetype, or it's definitely up there. It also wins a lot, so it is heavily contested. It is unlikely that you are going to just be past this for free, but you should keep an eye out for it. Therefore, I don't recommend forcing this, although there are quite a lot of good commons and uncommons here, more so than other pairs. It is very risky to try and just go all in onto an archetype. What I always recommend is trying to take the most powerful card for the first few picks and then see what is open and adjust accordingly. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a Gremlin Tamer, really treat it like royalty. It will save you. Being able to make multiple creatures for free is too much of an advantage. Also, try to prioritize instant speed removal. You are incentivized in this deck to play sorcery speed enchantments for their additional triggers, but as such, you can be a little bit light on instant speed removal, and that can make combat a little bit more stressful. Try and take some, and then also when you have it, try and be tight about using it. If you found this video helpful, I've been making other ones for different color pairs, and you can check them out here.